Hello, everyone. This is Martin Willis with Podcast UFO for episode number 10 with Paola Harris. A couple of announcements. We have a number of podcasts lined up, so we're going to start posting them once a week. That may change after we get caught up to go back to bi-weekly. You can follow us on Twitter at twitter.com/podcastufo. You can listen to us on your smartphone on Stitcher.com. That app is on our website. I have to say I'm really enjoying doing this podcast. I get a lot of email, and I encourage you to write. My email address is info@podcastufo.com. Today's guest is a wonderful woman named Paola Harris. She's lived part of her life in Italy and part of her life here in the States. Very interesting. She's a woman of integrity. And please check out her latest book. I hope you enjoy today's show. Hi, everyone. I have Paola Harris on the line. How you doing, Paola?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Thanks so much for joining us. And actually, it was first Dr. Lynn Katai told me to get in touch with you. And you're pretty good friends with her?
Very good friends. She's done so much for consciousness of the UFO phenomenon because of the Phoenix Lights. Very courageous lady.
Yes, definitely. And one of the reasons I was fascinated and wanted you on the show is I looked at your bio, and you have a connection with Italy, and so you are doing work in Italy and in the United States. Can you talk about that?
Sure. I'm Italian. My father was the Italian consul for the state of Rhode Island, and years ago I used to live there, and I came over to this country. But in 1979, as a married woman with children, I saw the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind. My formal background is I have a master's in education and teach high school English. So I was teaching a class called Science Fiction in 1979, and I went to see Close Encounters. At the very end of that film, when Francois Truffaut, who represented Jacques Vallée, has a contact with these beings, it's a very emotional contact, and I broke into tears and didn't know why I had that reaction. But when I did my research, I found out that Dr. J. Allen Hynek, the astronomer, who was the head of CUFOS, Center for UFO Studies in Evanston, Illinois, and former project manager for Blue Book, was a consultant with Spielberg. So by accident, and there are no coincidences, but my life is full of them, I met Alan Hynek in Evanston because I was at a wedding there. And when I walked into the Center for UFO Studies, he said to me, you speak Italian? I said, yes. And he said, would you do my Italian translation? So because of my work with him from 1980 to 86 when he died, and my travels with him, I knew right away that this was real. It isn't like, do you believe in UFOs? This is a scientist. He taught me how to research. He taught me the field. I even have my little CUFOS card for research. And so as I was, doing my regular job teaching, I also traveled with Alan Hynek, and that's how I got started, because this is not a normal kind of thing.
That's right. And I also saw that you met Colonel Philip Corso, who had to do with Roswell.
Yeah, that was another coincidence, because I was working in Italy at the time. It was 1997, and my boss, the head of Area 51 magazine, Italian magazine, said for me to go to Roswell and try to find this man. I didn't even know what he looked like, who had written the book The Day After Roswell, which basically deals with back engineering alien technology. My boss, Maurizio, told me somehow to find him and to do an interview with him. And when I got to Roswell, it was a big party. I mean, this was the 50th anniversary. Everybody was there, from Whitley Strieber to John Mack to everybody. And so what happened was, which was very interesting, I got to Roswell. I didn't have a place to stay. I went to the press club. I said, I can't stay 50 miles away from here. I said, I've got to stay here. And they said, we're all booked, but try to go to the phone book and see if you can find a place to stay. I opened up the phone book. It was the Sallyport Inn. I called them. They had one room available for 3 days, and it was the room next to Colonel Philip Corso.
Oh, that's great.
So what happened was I went to the museum there where he was doing the press conference, and he said he wanted to talk to me because I was Italian, and we formed a friendship. He was, the head of research and development at the Pentagon. I told him I was from Italy. I consequently invited him to Italy twice. I was with him in Italy during Easter and during the two conferences that we presented, and it was a real eye-opener for me in my research. I wrote the preface to The Day After Roswell in Italian. We translated the book, and I've got to honestly tell you that was the only place he spoke. There was a lawsuit against the book here in the United States, so there was never any talking in the United States, or Colonel Corso never really attended any conferences or anything. Everything we found out in Europe.
Is that right? Now, I've seen him interviewed before, but are you just saying that he wouldn't publicly speak?
No, he couldn't. He couldn't because when there's a lawsuit, your lawyers tell you can't speak. He was interviewed by George, I think it was Art Bell at the time, and different people on the phone, but he didn't do a conference. The only conference he did was the one at the UFO Museum in Roswell. I think he did maybe one or two small ones in Florida where he lived. But the thing that was, he had so much to tell. And what we got in Europe we got documents from his original notes. The book was co-written with Bill Burns, but we got the original notes, which we published in Italy, called Dawn of a New Age. For the people who want the original notes, they can go to Open Minds TV, because I think his son has sold the original notes to Open Minds TV, and people could read them. And because there's been criticism of the book here because of inaccuracies, but his original notes are original. So he also talked to us about the Philadelphia experiment. He talked about time travel. He talked about all kinds of things when he was in Italy. And the thing that's important, though, from my research, and I'm sharing this with you, is that I never understood why the secret was secret. I thought it was about panic or about aliens. Mm-hmm. Well, I found out from being with Corso that the reason why it's a very important secret for security reasons is because of the back-engineered technology. Now I'm talking about craft. Besides artifacts, and that is when you have that, that is a monetary economic thing, and these UFOs are not using fossil fuel or oil to fly around with.
Mm-hmm. Did he get into details of actually seeing these things in person?
Well, you're asking a really interesting question. I have written 5 books. My first book, Connecting the Dots, Making Sense of the UFO Phenomenon, has the first interview Colonel Corso gave me in Roswell, New Mexico, an interview that I never printed because I thought people would think he was crazy. And if you want me to, I can tell you what he told me.
Sure. Yeah.
He basically, when I was in the room next to him, he came into my room. He started telling me that he thought that what had happened at Roswell was two craft collided, and the second one appeared in 1957, that they both went out of a time sequence. And I asked him why. And he said because he was the head of a missile battalion in Red Canyon in 1957. He said, and he was flying over an area where he saw a craft on the ground, and he consequently went over to it alone with his Jeep, and he saw the craft appearing and disappearing, and he said he threw some cactus under it, and it squashed a cactus, so he knew it was physical, but going in and out of a dimension. And he said he turned to the left, and this being came out of a cave. he sent me a fax of what the being looked like. The being had around its head a silver band with some kind of red stone in the middle, and he proceeded to tell me that they had several of these at the Pentagon, that it was an interface, which really confused me. But anyway, he said, he pulled out his gun, he pointed it at the being, he said, friend or foe, and then he asked me, he said, guess what he said back? And I said, neither. And Colonel Corso said, that's right. He said, neither friend nor foe. And the being asked Colonel Corso to shut down the radar so he could take off, because in those days that radar was so powerful, it brought down the craft. It was almost like a weapon. Mm-hmm. And Corso said, well, what do you have to offer me? And the being repeated telepathically, a new world if you can take it. Huh. And so Corso writes this down on a napkin and says, Paula, what does this mean? And I said, I can't tell you what this means. I said to him, not only can I tell you what this means, I don't know if I could print this. And I didn't, not mm-hmm. until after he died, because I just wanted him to talk about, the artifacts he had from the Roswell crash. I don't want him to talk about contact. It's really hard for me to talk about contact because mm-hmm. it's not in my data bank. But can I tell you that, if he had stayed with the back engineered technology, which are the fiber optics, integrated circuits, night screening devices, that he had talked about having, and the high tenacity fibers, which he told me he had, if he had stayed with that, he said he had these things in a file that was given to him by General Trudeau. And that's nuts and bolts for me. As a journalist, I can deal with that. Mm-hmm. I can't deal with this other story, but ever since he died in 1998, I printed this story in my book, and A New World, if you can take it. Can you imagine what that could mean?
Wow, that's something. Some of the stories are hard for me to swallow. I had Stan Romanek on. I told him that I didn't believe a lot of the stuff he said.
Can I tell you, though, sure. I covered the Stan Romanek story 7 years ago. I started covering it, and I never printed anything. I'm like that. I'll do research, and I won't print anything. But I can guarantee you, if somebody asked me today, that is the best documented case. I've seen the films. I've over the years, I've seen what's happened to him. I have gotten one of his Audrey calls, and I've been in his house when weird stuff has happened. I took Swiss TV over there to film an interview with him, and the faucet turned on by itself. I mean, things just, I don't know who in the world is messing with Stan, but Stan is very much a very interesting case, and I wish people would research that. It's been 7 years I've looked into this, and I think maybe it's stopped right now, but the downloading of these formulas, and Stan has not got an education. These formulas have gone to top-level physicists, and it's not normal. And they're anti-gravity formulas. And I know the physicists that are looking at them because they're friends of mine, and they're top government physicists. And I don't know, how can somebody download anti-gravity stuff that's, you've seen these formulas that go on for pages. Mm-hmm. And so I'm thinking, okay, well, somebody's messing with Stan. So I agree with you, though, because I can't deal with contact stories. I knew John Mack very well, and he's good at it. Yvonne Smith is very good at it. There are other people out in the field that do that kind of work that are very good at it.
Well, I try to be open-minded, and I let Stan say his thing, and we had a lot of downloads. He has a lot of people that believe in him, for sure, and I had a lot of emails after that. I wanted to ask you, what is Italy like? Are Italian people more open-minded to the UFO phenomenon?
God, you have such good questions.
Well, thank you.
Well, that's true. It's because, I've had to compare. I lived there from 1992 to 2007, and I spoke in all those countries, Spain and Switzerland and France, and I've spoken in Germany. And the thing is that it's older. It's an older continent. So the thing is that these people are looking at it not, as a curiosity. It's not Disneyland over there. The people that attend the conferences over there do not wear T-shirts or, tinfoil hats. They are physicists and scientists and professors and professional people that are sincerely concerned and sincerely curious about this phenomenon, and they know that if a pilot like Jean-Charles Duboc, who's part of the Cometa Report, I interviewed him in my book, Stargate to a New Reality, if he's having a problem because he sees a UFO over Paris, and he's got a commercial airliner, and he's part of the Cometa Report, as I said, this is a real serious issue. And they're looking at what can be done to make this feel serious. And you asked me how it's covered. Well, when I lived in Italy on the 6 o'clock news, we got the Mexican Campeche story about the 9 UFOs around that plane, that military plane. And the guy that talked about it on the 6 o'clock news was so knowledgeable about UFOs that he compared it to the Hesdalen Norway lights, which means somewhere they had a background on the research, because there is a continuing phenomenon in Norway at Hesdalen. So I'm going, boy, these guys are really good. Yeah, these guys are good. In other words, they don't look at it as woo-woo or something strange. They look at it as a phenomenon that's real. I mean, we know it's real, but it should be studied seriously.
I agree 100%. I've brought this up a number of times. A lot of it has to do with funding, and people are afraid of their careers being washed up.
Well, yeah, Carl Sagan knew. I mean, he was an East Coast person. He was Cornell University. Carl Sagan knew that it was real. I mean, he told Alan, I remember Alan telling me, Alan Hynek, Dr. J. Alan Hynek, he told Alan, look, I'm not going to go out there and tell you're crazy. I lose all my funding. He says, I know it's real. Of course, if you look at Blue Book, Carl Sagan is listed as one of the people who was on the committee there. I mean, he's looking at Blue Book files, which are, Air Force files. He knows it's, and then he goes on television and talks about an amoeba. Yes, there's this life in the universe. Well, this amoeba is not flying the craft that we're seeing.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I think it's interesting that Carl Sagan seemed to be so against the phenomenon of us being visited, yet he had something to do with Contact.
Yes, the movie Contact, actually it was a book first, was written by Carl Sagan. I think, just personally, that it was his attempt to to tell the truth in the end, because he knew he was dying. And in the movie Contact, not only was there a problem with time, that missing time, but there was also alien contact in the form of Jodie Foster's father. So Carl knew, and I think, and when push comes to shove, in the end, if you know that the time is up, you tell the truth. And I think that I know that Carl knew, but at the very end, he did a beautiful, beautiful thing by presenting us with that gift of the movie Contact.
Yeah, that was one of my favorite movies for many years. I love that movie. If something like that happened and followed all the way through, where there were 14 hours of blank tape on her headset, that would be just swept under the rug. They just kind of ignored that whole part of it, and that was just so true to nature, the way things are.
Well, yeah, but you got to look at what vested interests people have in disclosure. Other countries are curious, so we have Brazil that has files and it comes out of the military. We have England that has, released their files. They just don't want to deal with it, but they've released their files and people should be reading them, because that's where actually I interviewed Milton Torres, who was a pilot in 1957, who was ordered to shoot down a UFO over Marsden Air Force Base in England, and he was in that report that came out. He's an American serviceman, but he came out in that report, so he was able to talk. And I'll tell you, it's a heavy burden for these guys. He started to get very emotional when I asked him, you were ordered to shoot down a UFO and you saw it? And he said yes. And he got emotional because he was sworn to secrecy until this file was released, and he really wanted to tell his dad. And his dad died about 3 years before this file was released. So these guys have to keep a secret. Mm-hmm. And then the other thing that's important about this was they're ordered to shoot these things down.
That doesn't make any sense. I mean, it would make total sense why no one would want to totally reveal themselves to us.
Well, yeah, that's one of the things, is that we are a hostile group. Well, I think they're looking at us as just what we're doing to each other after all these centuries. I mean, we haven't really evolved very much. And so a friend of mine, Renato Longado, talks about the alien agenda as the different cultures, and they're not all gray. I have so many stories of human-type aliens, but the different cultures that are visiting are looking at us as if they are cosmic anthropologists, and they're looking at the human race to see how far it's progressed. And I dare say it really hasn't gone very far.
No, the only thing that's advanced is our technology. We have not. I don't think we've advanced as a species. We're still very primitive, and we're still very tribal. They most likely could destroy us, and if they have the technology they have, and I think they obviously don't mind us seeing them, because enough people see them. There's like 1,000 sightings a day worldwide or something like that. So they obviously don't mind us seeing them, but as far as interacting, that's where they draw the line. So it makes total sense that they would be observing only.
Well, see, the thing is, they do. I think that they do interact with certain people. That's why, I know for a fact they've interacted with Travis Walton and with Stan Romack, which are the two cases that I will support as a journalist. But the thing is that they interact with people they feel they can interact with. But as far as the visitations, even Colonel Corso used to say, it's ridiculous to believe that they're good, bad, or indifferent. They're neither. They're just there. Mm-hmm. And if they wanted to destroy us, we wouldn't have a chance. They've got a technology that's far superior. However, in the way that we think, we're thinking of developing weapons to shoot them out of the air. Because that's the mentality. I mean, that has been the mentality of the human being since the beginning of time. There's just very few people, I think, on the planet that want to look for a diplomatic solution to this. And that's why, in the beginning, I wanted to go from ufology, for me, the traditional ufology, which was sightings only, into exopolitics. My books, I have 3 exopolitics books. And basically, exopolitics, the definition for me, is the scholarly study of the alien presence on Earth, and it's not an amoeba, and the implications, both sociological and political, for the planet. I mean, I'm looking at some kind of diplomacy here. If we ever had contact, we literally have nothing in place for a formal contact that I know of. Mm-hmm.
You mentioned Travis Walton a minute ago. For that incident that happened to him, which was really amazing, has there been anything reoccurring with him at all? Or was it just that one incident?
Yeah, I would like to talk about these people, because these people, when I was in Italy, I paid for their way to come across the ocean to speak to the Italians and everyone that's like John Mack, Linda Howe, Richard Dolan, Travis Walton. So Travis has been to my home in Rome at least 3 times, and I believe his story because he's a down-to-earth, grounded person. And in fact, I'm working on his story right now, because for me that is the latest breaking news in ufology. He appeared at the International UFO Congress with 2 lumberjacks that were with him when this all happened. Mm-hmm. And it was very emotional for their testimonies with Travis, because one of them asked for forgiveness for leaving Travis there.
Right.
They saw the craft, they described it. They said that the underbelly of the craft was this white, brilliant light, that they had never seen such a white light, and that they were terrorized, and that's why they left Travis's body there. They thought he was dead. And so the fact that these 2 lumberjacks came out, and the fact that these that Travis is trying to get the rest of them. One has since died. Dallas has since died, but he wants to get the rest of the guys, the other 6, to come out and speak with him. Is for me the breaking news in ufology. We don't really need the substantiation of his case because it was an FBI researched case. I mean, he disappeared for 5 days, but the sociological part of that, you know, the emotions that these guys went through seeing this, I think is really interesting.
Yeah, that's an amazing case. That was back in the 1970s, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was in the 1970s, and as far as anything, you know, current, you know, Travis has redone his book so that it's interesting for people to read. I think that people should read that. Plus, he's wanting to talk about it seriously. I mean, Travis is one of those people that's serious about disclosure. He wants to know what's going on. I
love the phrase someone, an earlier guest said, "We know that they're here, we just don't know what they are." And that was a borrowed quote that he borrowed from someone else. And I think that fits pretty well. A few minutes ago, you said that a lot of aliens were humanoid and everyone thinks of them as grays, but they're not all grays. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Well, yeah, just look at the Travis Walton case. I mean, he said the gray beings were in the room with him. He believes now that they had some kind of device that brought him back to life. He just was terrified looking at them. But he said that the beings that took him out of the craft into the hangar were, he said they look like blonde twins, almost clones, beautiful blonde people, of male and female. And the thing is that not only has Travis reported this, I mean, I did the Charles Hall case. He was a weatherman in 1965 in the Indian Springs facility of the Area 51 base. And the Millennium Hospitality books, all 4 of them, show the fact that Charles met tall white beings with their children who happened to be hosted by the government. He said, well, basically not the government, but the military on the Area 51 base. Now, Charles is very credible, is working right now at an Air Force base. And if people read that, they know he's telling the truth. He talked to me about this, and it took me 2 years to do this story. I wouldn't do the story without finding the other men that work with Charles. I found 4 of them in 1965. That these beings on a technology exchange had their children with them. They were the situation was at Indian Springs facility, and they were tall, white, very thin people. And when I realized that we're talking about people, I looked at backwards at Adamski, at the fact that he had a contact with a person. This was a warning against the atomic use of atomic weapons, and if people study that, then being in Italy that same year that Adamski had that contact, another contactee named Eugenio Siracusa had a contact with the very same people under Mount Etna in Sicily. I did research on that and found that there was a letter from President Eisenhower to this Italian contactee. So Eisenhower was really involved in these human-type contacts. He was involved in it. I saw the letter. It's in one of my books. Eugenio Siracusa described the same guy, blue, kind of suit with long blonde hair. So I went to see Billy Meyer. Everybody's wondering about that case. I will support that case. I was on the compound. I talked to the people. I talked to Guido Musbrugger, who wrote And Still They Fly. He's a medical doctor, skeptic, who wrote the book on Meyer. That is real. Those pictures are real. I mean, I also learned that the Japanese bought all his movie footage. So there's no fishing pole with a craft on it, because the movie footage is amazing. You see the craft over the highway with the cars under it. So,
and this is the guy with one arm, so he's not going to easily do something like that.
So, if you're an intelligent researcher, you say, why is all the real human-type alien contacts being hidden? And what we're brainwashed with is this idea of the extraterrestrial biological entity, which is basically a clone a little gray that is created. Colonel Corso basically said that they knew that it was an extraterrestrial biological entity because he had the autopsies. He said they were more afraid of who created that, who created the actual EB. They called him an EB that flew the craft. I mean, because he said that clone or that extraterrestrial biological entity became one with the craft and could fly that craft. So we have to stop thinking that aliens are these little gray people. I'm working on 2 Italian cases where they're human, and they're human looking. And so in a way, if you are an intelligent person that's looking at this, you're thinking God didn't just create human beings. He probably created different planets, different species, and different type people, actual people on these different planets. So you know what's so discouraging, as a teacher, I used to ask kids to write a research paper and go to first-hand sources. In other words, try to get the actual person. Today, you go on internet and you get all this gossip. Mm-hmm. I would never accept that for a research paper because that's secondhand stuff. It's been revamped. It's not accurate. You got to go to the real person. You got to talk to Travis Walton, not read about him. And the thing that I do, and I think I'm one of the only people in the field, is I only do first-hand research. I fly all over the world. I speak to people, and I cover a story in person.
That's wonderful. So can you tell me about your latest book and anything else that's coming up?
Well, my latest book is called UFOs, How Does One Speak to a Ball of Light? And basically it has 9 protocols for contact. 9 different things that we need to look at, like is it our stuff or their stuff? Is there a manual for biological contamination? Things like that. I've put together 7 chapters with real interviews from top-level people, including the ex-defense minister of Canada, Edgar Mitchell, Apollo 14 astronaut, who's a friend of mine. Yeah.
Really? Wow.
And I just interviewed the daughter of Kenneth Arnold. That's in the book. Plus, I just helped Clifford Stone publish his book, and he did crash retrieval. That's in my book. And Clifford talks about his cases in Vietnam of meeting live aliens. So, the book has, this is real. Now, what do you want to do about it? And it's an incredible book. It also goes to the very end where I talk about the need for the United Nations or a supra-United Nations to get involved in this so countries of the world can have an intelligent discussion. And I talk about Lee Spiegel, who he writes for the Huffington Post, and he's, for me, a hero who put it together with Grenada in the 1970s, and he had Gordon Cooper, Alan Hynek, and Jacques Vallée, and all the people talking to the United Nations. That's basically what my ultimate goal is, to have a universal discussion and dialogue about this. So that's called UFOs, How Does One Speak to a Ball of Light, and that's on Amazon.
Okay.
What I'm doing, just because I want to do it, is I'd like to give an award to Angela Joyner, a mainstream journalist who covered the Stephenville case and lost her job. So I'm having a 2012 Women's Symposium in Glen Rose, Texas, and the speakers are Carol Rosin, who will talk about banning weapons in space, Dr. Lynn Kitai, the Phoenix Lights. Lisa Romanak talks about what happened to a spouse of a contactee, and Tracy Austin Peters, who has a book, who has a show on the paranormal. Basically women who, and Angela Joyner will have a panel of the 4 Stephenville witnesses, so there are guys in this conference. It's May 18th, 19th, and 20th. And we're going to be screening The Hidden Hand by James Carman, producer James Carman. It's a documentary that won the EB Award at the International UFO Congress.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I know an astronaut that actually walked on the moon, and there was he was involved in a UFO sighting that is well publicized, Alan Bean, but he said he didn't really want to talk about it. So that's a shame.
Well, it's hard because they talk about it, and then where does it go? I mean, nothing changes here.
Yeah, that's
And
true.
that's what's so sad.
That's right. Well, I think you're doing a wonderful job, and I haven't asked this of another guest yet on the air, but would you like to be on the show again? I really enjoyed you.
Well, yeah, maybe in the future I'd love to discuss it, and I thank you for presenting it in a stable and journalistic manner, because I'd like to look at this as a serious issue, and it's like studying anything. I think we need to study this.
I do too. And thank you so much for joining us. So this is Martin Willis with Paola Harris, and that's it for today. Thank you, Paula.
Thank you.